Welcome. This time, we'll explore the grim customs that allowed a woman to be given to soldiers in the Middle Ages. Whether called a gift, a payment, or a punishment, such acts revealed the cruelty woven into war and power. And to see it clearly, we begin at the moment the walls give way. The shouting outside has shifted. At first, the noise of a siege is almost constant, the thud of stones from mangonels, the drumbeat of rams hitting wood, the curses and calls from the defenders above. But when the defenders' voices thin and the rhythm of the blows changes, everyone inside the walls feels it. You don't need to be a soldier to know when the fight has turned. The air changes. Conversations drop to whispers. Children cling to skirts without being told. Then comes the moment itself. The first crack in the timbers is like a gunshot. Another follows, louder, the splintering sound swallowed by the roar of men outside. Iron hinges groan, the gate bulges inward, and for a few heartbeats it holds, until it doesn't. The sound of the collapse is not one noise but many, wood snapping, chains breaking, dust coughing up from the ground. The gate doesn't swing open like a door. It collapses like an exhausted body, spilling shards and splinters. And through that broken mouth of the city come the victors. They don't rush in wildly. Not at first. The first wave is deliberate, shields high, scanning for danger. Their boots strike the ground in unison, a drumbeat made of leather and iron. Behind them, more pour in, faces smeared with soot from the smoke at the walls, male shirts glinting dully in the fading light. These are not men who look around in awe. They know exactly what they've come for. Loot can wait. The coins in a broken strongbox will not run. The sacks of grain in the storehouses will not sprout legs. But people can disappear. And in a conquered city, people can be as valuable as gold. The orders are not shouted now, they've been given already. Find the ones the commander wants brought first. That means officials, that means anyone who might be worth a ransom, and, in the cold arithmetic of this time, it means women. 2 soldiers peel off from the column. One gestures, the other moves with the ease of someone who has done this before. They walk past a cart tipped on its side, past a man lying motionless with his arm bent at an unnatural angle. Their eyes don't linger on the wounded, they are searching for something else. You feel the rope before you see them. It slides across your wrists and tightens, the coarse fibers biting into your skin. There is no struggle, not because you agree, but because you understand. This is not a chase. This is a selection. They don't speak to you. One grips your arm, the other keeps his eyes forward, leading you toward the square. The ground is littered with debris, scraps of cloth, an overturned stool, the glint of something silver before a boot grinds it into the dirt. In the square stands the commander. His horse shifts under him, nostrils flaring, sensing the tension. Around him is a small knot of men, all silent. You are pushed forward until you are within his shadow. He does not ask your name. He does not ask what you have done. In truth, you have done nothing. But in this place, on this day, the war itself is the verdict, and you are part of the spoils. There is no parchment, no seal, no trial. Only the nod of the commander, and the tightening of the rope as you are pulled away again. Behind you, others are being brought forward, some crying, some silent, one screaming a name into the dust. It doesn't matter. The decisions are already made. This handing over, this moment where a human being is treated like payment, is not considered an act of madness. It is procedure. Soldiers are promised rewards for their service, and while coin is rare and rations are thin, there is always another form of reward to give. In chronicles, such transactions are often not even described in detail. They are brushed aside in a sentence, as if they were too ordinary to dwell upon. To the men receiving you, it is a victory bonus, one more proof that they have earned their keep. Some of them may not even think of it as cruelty. To them, cruelty is what happened to the men still lying in the streets. You are alive, and that, in their minds, is mercy. Around you, the city is changing hands. The banners of the defenders are being cut down, replaced with the colors of the victors. The market stalls are being stripped, the food weighed out and claimed. The houses near the gate will be emptied before morning. But these are slow processes. The handing over of prisoners is quick, efficient. You are led toward the edge of the square, where a small group of soldiers waits. They are seated on the steps of a fountain that no longer runs, their helmets set beside them, their faces flushed from the heat of battle. They look up as you approach. There is no surprise in their eyes, only expectation. The rope is passed from one hand to another, like passing a bag of grain or a sack of coin. No words are exchanged. You stand there, your wrists bound, the rough fiber now damp from sweat. You hear the commander's voice behind you, already calling for the next name on his list. There is a strange quiet in that moment, not silence, exactly, but the pause between two storms. The storm of the siege has passed. The storm of the night is about to begin. You don't know which will be worse. This is the logic of war here. When the gate falls, everything inside becomes property. Not all of that property can be weighed, or stored, or sold, but it can be given. And to the men who fought for the breach, the gift of a living captive is as much a sign of victory as the flag they'll raise over the ruins. The fall of the gate is not the end of the siege. For some, it is the beginning of the longest night. The commander's nod is barely over before the rhythm of the square changes. The battle haze is lifting, replaced by something quieter but no less deliberate, the dividing of spoils. You've seen it with grain, with silver, with bolts of cloth, each item stacked or measured or listed by a clerk. But this time, there is no scale, no tally. Just names called out into the air, answered by the shuffle of boots and the sound of someone being led forward. This is not chaos. It is an ordered ritual. The captain, now standing where the commander sat moments before, unrolls a strip of parchment. His voice is steady, almost bored, as though he's reading out rations for the week. The soldiers gather in a loose half-circle, some still smelling of sweat and iron, others with fresh bandages where blades scrape skin. The first name is called. A man steps forward, and with him, a soldier leads a woman from the cluster of captives. She stumbles slightly, her ankles still tied, and the soldier holding her arm doesn't slow down to steady her. She is brought to the front, turned to face the man, and for a moment they just stand there. No words. No choice. Then the rope at her wrists is passed over like payment. The captain scratches a mark beside the soldier's name. In the eyes of the men, this is the completion of a promise. Weeks, sometimes months, of unpaid service, of marching through mud and sleeping in the cold, are repaid, here, in the open air of the conquered square. To them, it is not strange, it is expected. This is what victory means when coin is short and plunder thin. The bodies of the defeated are currency. Your own name isn't called, not yet. You stand in the shade of the fountain, watching as one by one the transactions continue. A soldier named Ralph laughs as he takes the rope of a red-haired woman, slinging it over his shoulder, as if she were a bundle of firewood. Another, older man simply nods and leads his prize away without a glance, already speaking to her in a low, commanding tone. The captain calls again. Somewhere in the back of the square, a cheer goes up, crude, mocking. The sound carries, but no one rebukes it. Here, in the aftermath of a siege, discipline bends. The men have lived on the edge of death for too long, and now they are on the other side of it. The rules that kept them in formation at the walls loosen in the shadow of victory. You wonder if any of them think about the women before them as anything other than spoils. Some might. Perhaps one will take his reward and do nothing worse than keep her as a servant. But even that thought feels like reaching for a thread of mercy in a cloth woven from cruelty. The truth is simpler and sharper. In this place, a woman's fate can be handed over as easily as bread or coin. The process goes on until the list is nearly done. At the far edge of the square, a group of men who have already received their share sit drinking from a skin of ale, their voices carrying across the stones. One gestures toward the remaining captives, laughing, as though pointing out cuts of meat in a butcher's stall. And then your name is called. Or rather, the name of the man who is to receive you. It feels strange, hearing it announced in the same tone that might be used to distribute salt pork or boots. You are led forward. The sun is hot now, heating the rope on your wrists. You can see the man who is to take you, young, broad-shouldered, his face half in shadow from the helmet tucked under his arm. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't look away either. The rope changes hands. A mark is made on the parchment. No one speaks to you, no one asks if you understand. The captain moves on to the next name, and you are already being pulled toward the edge of the square. Behind you, the calls and responses continue. Each exchange is a reminder that for these men, the war is over, but for you, and the others like you, it has only shifted into a different kind of battle. And if you think this is the worst fate waiting after a victory, you will learn soon enough that there are punishments dressed as mercy, and gifts that weigh heavier than chains. If being handed over as a reward to the men was the silent law of victory, then being given to them as punishment was the public theater of power. It was not enough for the accused to lose their freedom, they had to lose it in a way that left no one in the village uncertain of the cost of disloyalty. You see it begin the way such things always begin, with an accusation that needs no proof, only a voice loud enough to carry. The word traitor is sharper than any blade, and it travels fast. This time it is a woman, a young one, perhaps in her 20s, who stands in the center of the square, her hands bound in front of her with coarse rope. The soldiers say she passed messages to the enemy, slipping scraps of parchment into the hands of traitors who came and went with the flow of war. She says nothing now. Silence is all she has left. There will be no trial. Not the kind with judges and evidence. The verdict is already written in the set of the commander's jaw. The siege has made the air thin with suspicion, and no commander will risk leniency when betrayal is even whispered. The punishment is declared not in the echo of the courtroom, but in the open air. She will serve the men she betrayed. Not with labor in the kitchens, not with endless hours in the fields, but in the most personal and demeaning way the garrison can decide. The crowd shifts uneasily. They know what this means. It is not a rare sentence, but it is not an everyday one either. It is saved for moments when an example must be made, when fear must be planted in soil already soaked with blood. You can see the unease in the way some turn their faces, pretending to be occupied with their sleeves or the cobblestones. Others watch openly, their eyes unblinking. The woman is led toward the barracks, but the path is deliberate, a slow procession past the market stalls, the blacksmith's anvil, the church steps. The soldiers on either side walk with a rhythm that feels rehearsed, each step a beat in a drum no one hears but everyone feels. Somewhere, a man spits. Somewhere else, a laugh cuts too loud and dies too quickly. The men of the garrison stand waiting at the open gates of the yard, some leaning on spears, others with arms folded. No one questions the order. The war has taught them obedience, and the silence of the law gives them permission. When she reaches the gate, the commander speaks again, not to her, but to them. His words are simple. This is what betrayal earns. He does not shout. He doesn't need to. The words are a knife laid on the table for everyone to see. There is no mercy in this exchange. No possibility that she will be spared at the last moment. Mercy is for mistakes. Treason, they say, is not a mistake. And so the rope at her wrists is passed into the hands of the waiting soldiers. She is no longer a prisoner of the war. She is property of the garrison. If you were to ask whether this is better or worse than the noose, you would get no clear answer. Some might say life in any form is worth keeping. Others would say the gallows are cleaner. The truth lies somewhere in between, in the hollow space where dignity used to live. Inside the barracks, the doors close. The crowd outside thins, some drifting back to the tasks of the day, others lingering as though waiting for another sentence to be carried out. The soldiers who led her away do not return immediately. When they do, their faces are unreadable. The story will move quickly through the streets. It will change as it travels. Some will say she confessed, others that she never spoke a word. Some will whisper that she was guilty, others that the commander simply needed to make an example of someone. By nightfall, everyone will know the sentence. By morning, they will remember the lesson more than the woman herself. This is the strange logic of war. When an enemy breaches the walls, the punishment is swift. When suspicion breaches the trust inside those walls, the punishment is something else entirely. Something slower. Something that leaves a mark not on the body alone, but on the memory of everyone who watched. And if you think refusing a commander's will could spare you such a fate, the next story will show you how even saying no in peacetime could open the same gate to the same yard. Not every woman who ended up in the garrison's yard was accused of treason or caught in the fever of war. Some arrived there through something far quieter, a single word spoken at the wrong moment. No. You might think saying no to a marriage proposal in the Middle Ages was just that, a matter of the heart, perhaps a scandal within the family, maybe a punishment like losing your dowry. But when the man proposing was favored by the local lord, or when the refusal meant a lost political tie, no could become a crime. And in a world where coin was scarce and favors were traded like grain, a daughter's hand could be bartered, withheld, or, if she dared to resist, sold in another way entirely. The woman in this story was not poor. Her father owned a small but respectable plot of land, barley fields, 2 milk cows, and enough tax in arrears to keep him awake at night. The man who wanted her was older, heavy-set, a merchant whose wealth came from selling salt to the garrison. She did not love him. She said so plainly. Once. Then again. And then a third time, when her father's voice grew sharp. In towns like this, refusals came with a price tag. Sometimes it was a fine, the sort most families could not pay without selling part of their land. Sometimes the fine could be settled another way, in labor, in goods, or in the currency that no one spoke of directly, but everyone understood. That is how it was decided. To save his land and avoid the fine, her father brought her to the gates of the garrison. She was handed over with fewer words than one might use when selling a cart. The commander didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. He asked only if the debt was settled, and when her father said yes, the soldiers led her inside. The laughter that followed was not cruel in the way a beating is cruel. It was worse, the low, knowing chuckle of men who understood exactly what sort of payment had just been made. Some in the square looked away, embarrassed. Others smirked, muttering that a daughter's duty was to serve her family, whatever form that took. In another part of the world, in a different hall, a noblewoman might have faced exile or confinement in a convent for refusing a match. Among peasants, the punishment could be as simple and as devastating as being given to soldiers for a night, or many nights. The wealthier could buy their way out, the poorer could not. And those caught in between, like her, could be traded away to erase debts, as casually as a sack of grain passed over a counter. Inside the barracks, she would not be the first or the last to arrive by way of an unpaid fine. The men didn't care why she was there. The details of her refusal, the insult to the merchant, the bargaining between her father and the commander, all of that stayed outside. Within those walls, her story was stripped down to a single fact: she had been given. By morning, her father would walk the fields knowing his land was safe for another season. The merchant would look elsewhere for a bride. The garrison would remember her face for a week, maybe two. And she would remember the sound of that laughter, the way it stayed behind her like a shadow even after she left. In the logic of this world, refusing a man's hand could cost you your freedom. But as the next story shows, sometimes the price was set not in the quiet of a negotiation, but in the open chaos of a siege, where the spoils were counted in grain, in gold, and in women. Sieges starved more than just the soldiers inside the walls. They starved the city itself, grinding its spirit down day by day until the people within began to weigh their possessions, and their lives, in terms of what could be eaten, what could be traded, what could be surrendered. You might picture a siege as an endless battering of stone walls with catapults and fire, but the truth is that hunger was often the real weapon. Weeks passed. Then months. Grain stores dwindled. Rats became currency. The bakers' ovens went cold. The last loaves were thin, pale things, baked from whatever could be milled fine enough to hold together. At the end, even those were gone. That is when the conquerors came through. And when they came, they did not simply take the city, they inventory it. Grain, gold, and women. Each in their own category, each counted in the same clipped voice of command. The plunder was as much a part of war as the march itself. The soldiers knew this moment well. When the gates opened, whether by force or surrender, they moved quickly, not just to secure the streets but to claim their share. The captain walked with a clerk who carried a list, the names and numbers of what was to be seized. A bushel of barley here, a chest of coin there, and in the same breath, the names of women. The clerk did not blush. He had written worse. For the men who had spent months in the mud and cold, living on half rations and sleeping under damp cloaks, the spoils were more than reward. They were proof that the siege was worth it. And for the women taken, the siege did not end when the walls fell. It began again, in another form. Imagine being pulled from your home in that moment. Your city is lost. Your neighbors are dead or scattered. The streets you walked every day are now filled with men whose language you may not even understand. You are herded into a square where the captives are divided. The grain goes one way, the silver another, and you are lined up in front of the men who will decide your fate as casually as they decide where to store the flour. Some were claimed on the spot by officers, a mark of rank and privilege. Others were distributed to squads, the same way salted meat was. It was a kind of brutal efficiency. Nothing was left to waste. Even the manner of taking was cold, stripped of ceremony or pretense. If you were valuable in some other way, a healer, a translator, a craftswoman, you might be spared the first night, only to find yourself traded later for goods or coin. And if you resisted, the order would be repeated in the same tone used to assign guard duty. Resistance did not change the fact that you were considered part of the spoils. The law had little to say about this. In many cases, it was accepted as an unspoken right of victory. Chroniclers might record the grain taken, the gold weighed, the livestock driven out, but the women were rarely named, their presence only hinted at in phrases like, "The camp was well supplied," or, "The men enjoyed the fruits of their victory." Everyone understood what that meant. Some lords encouraged it openly, seeing it as a way to keep their men loyal and obedient after long campaigns. Others preferred to look the other way, their silence a form of consent. Either way, the result was the same. The spoils were claimed, and the city that had endured months of siege now endured something quieter, but no less devastating. For the women, survival depended on chance. If you were claimed by a single man of rank, you might be treated as a possession to be guarded, still a prisoner, but perhaps shielded from the worst of the chaos. If you were handed to a group, you belonged to no one and everyone, which meant you were safe from no one at all. And when the conquerors finally left, to return home, or to march to the next war, they did not take everyone with them. Some women were left behind, changed in ways that no one in their old lives wanted to speak of. They came back to homes that no longer felt like homes, to neighbors who looked at them differently, to a life in which the siege had never truly ended. It is tempting to imagine that such cruelty belonged only to the brutal fringes of war, but this was part of the system. Soldiers expected spoils. Commanders promised them. And cities learned to fear not just the battering ram, but the list, the quiet, methodical taking of everything that could be claimed. The next scene will take us even further inside that logic, into the shadows of the dungeon, where prisoners learned that rations could be earned in ways that were never written in any manual of war. Dungeons were never meant to be places where people lived. They were places where people waited, for trial, for ransom, for execution. Cold stone, dripping water, air that smelled of iron and mold. The only light came in thin, reluctant beams through grates above. And in the Middle Ages, those who waited in such places knew that survival often depended less on law than on bargains. Some of those bargains were simple: a coin slipped to a guard for a scrap of bread, a message carried to a relative in town. But some were darker, and they didn't always involve the prisoner doing the paying. You can picture the setting. The siege is over. The victors have taken the city, and now the dungeons, once used by the fallen rulers, are filled with their enemies, their allies, and anyone unlucky enough to be caught in between. The air is thick with fear and the stink of too many bodies in too little space. In this darkness, the guards control everything: food, water, the time you're allowed to stand, the time you're allowed to sleep. They can keep you warm or let you freeze. And for some prisoners, the only way to receive anything beyond the bare minimum is to earn it. That is how the arrangement begins. The offer isn't made openly. It starts with a whisper through the bars: "There's a way you can eat tonight." Sometimes the guards are speaking to the prisoners themselves. Sometimes they are speaking to someone else, someone newly brought in, chained at the wrists, who has nothing to trade but herself. The men who control these spaces have the power to decide how the night will go. A loaf of bread, a blanket, a single candle, these things are handed over as payment, but they are not bought with coin. And the woman who is brought into the cell knows, before the door even closes, what her role will be. The rest of the prisoners know, too. Some turn away, ashamed or afraid. Others watch in silence, understanding that tonight's bargain might mean they get a piece of bread tomorrow. It is not kindness, it is transaction. In some cases, this share was not even for the prisoner's benefit. There were commanders who used women as part of their own internal politics, offering them to soldiers in the dungeon as a form of morale control. If the garrison was restless or disobedient, a night like this could be used to bring them back in line. No law condemned it. No scribe wrote it down. It was simply part of the unspoken economy of power in war. A prisoner's rations could be doubled if they participated. A prisoner's punishment could be lightened if they were agreeable. And if they refused, there were other ways to make life in the dungeon worse than it already was. Think for a moment about the cruelty of such a choice. Hunger already gnaws at your bones. Cold stiffens your fingers until you can barely move them. Every sound in the dark echoes in your skull. And then you are given a choice that isn't really a choice at all. to endure another night like this, or to go without food until your body begins to break. Sometimes the woman brought in was not even a prisoner herself. She might be someone taken from the town above, offered as part of a deal between the guards and the soldiers who were meant to be watching the cells. They called it keeping the men happy. And when morning came, there was no ceremony to mark what had happened. The bread was gone, the blanket folded back into the guard's store. The woman was taken out, her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the damp stone walls. For the men left in the cell, the memory lingered. Not as guilt, not as pity, but as another piece of the siege's spoils, not taken in the open square, but in the quiet, foul air of a place where the rules of the surface world no longer applied. And in a way, it was worse than what happened outside. In the open, cruelty had witnesses. In the dungeon, it was swallowed by stone, carried only in the whispers of those who survived it. Our next step will move from the dungeon to the church's shadow, where accusations of witchcraft could lead to punishments that did not end in fire, but began in the hands of soldiers who claimed to be cleansing the soul. The accusation comes first, and it almost never comes alone. Maybe she owned a book she couldn't read. Maybe her herbs worked better than the physician's draft. Maybe she had an argument with the wrong neighbor on the wrong day. In the Middle Ages, which was not a description of magic so much as a convenient label for a woman who made someone uneasy, the penalty for witchcraft was often death, burning at the stake, strangling, drowning, but not always. There were times when the execution was avoided, not out of mercy, but out of preference. Fire was quick. Fire was final. Fire left nothing to be used. And so, the bishop or the captain of the guard might decide that instead of flames, the woman should be cleansed. The word sounds holy, almost gentle, but in this context it meant something far from either. It meant soldiers, and it meant the kind of punishment that took place out of sight, in a guarded courtyard or behind the walls of the garrison. Imagine her being led there. Her wrists are bound, but not so tightly she cannot move them, because she will be made to work, in a sense. The soldiers are told they are purging the devil from her body, forcing the sin out with hands and jeers. The bishop nods approval. No torch is lit, no pyre is built, but the cruelty burns all the same. The soldiers relish this kind of order. It is not written in any official law, but it has a place in the quiet, corrupt agreements between church and sword. The bishop gets to say the witch has been punished, the soldiers get their entertainment, and the town gets its warning. Everyone's role is clear, except hers, and hers doesn't matter. You might think such treatment was reserved for those truly feared for their supposed powers, but in truth, the label, which could be applied to anyone inconvenient. An outspoken widow, a healer who charged too little, a servant who refused advances. Once the word was spoken, it was as good as a verdict. There's an ugly efficiency in this, without fire, method. No need to gather wood, no need to risk the spectacle turning against the accusers, no need to draw the attention of higher authorities who might question the process. It could all be done in an afternoon, with only the participants and a few silent witnesses knowing the truth. And after? She might be released, told she had been spared the stake through God's grace. The villagers would see her walk back into the street, clothes torn, eyes fixed on the ground, and they would know, without asking, that she had been cleansed. The shame was as much a sentence as any execution. For the soldiers, it was just another order carried out. For the bishop, it was a matter settled. For her, it was a life forever altered, and not for the better. There's a particular cruelty here, one that runs deeper than the act itself, the pretense of righteousness. When someone is burned, everyone knows it is a killing. When someone is cleansed, it is dressed in the language of salvation, as though it were done for her benefit. That twisted framing let the guilty call themselves merciful, and left her no way to protest without seeming ungrateful for her own survival. And sometimes, this cleansing was only the first step. A woman branded as a witch, even one spared execution, became a useful token in the hands of those in power. If she was seen as touched by evil, she could be handed over to soldiers again and again, each time under the guise of keeping the devil contained. It's important to understand, the absence of fire did not mean the absence of pain, or humiliation, or ruin. In some ways, it meant more of all three, because the punishment could be repeated. A stake burned once, a cleansing, could last for weeks, even years, as the order was given again whenever it suited those in command. And while this might sound like something whispered in far-off villages, it happened in cities too, in walled towns with cathedrals and cobbled streets, where soldiers patrolled openly and the church bells rang over markets. Respectable places could hide indecent acts more easily than the lawless fringes, because respectability itself was a shield. The people knew. They always knew. But to speak against the arrangement was to invite the same fate, so mouths stayed closed and eyes turned away. When it was over, her body carried the proof, but her words would not be believed. Even if she spoke, the answer would be the same: better this than the fire. That was the phrase they used to silence her, and themselves. Our path now turns from the bishop's quiet blessing to the commander's loud decree, where mercy is replaced with strategy, and women become political gifts to hold an army together. The bishop's blessing still lingers in the air, the scent of incense clinging to the damp stones. The woman accused of witchcraft has been cleansed, without flame, her cries fading into the noise of the garrison yard. The soldiers leave that chamber with a kind of restless hunger, not for food, but for something to break the monotony of siege life. And it is in that restless space, between cruelty disguised as piety and the boredom of waiting for the next campaign, that the commander begins to make his next move. He knows his men are tired. Victories have been won, but the nights are long and the discipline frays like old rope. In an army that holds together more by promise than by pay, loyalty must be fed, and not always with coin or bread. So, when the spoils of the last raid are tallied, the grain, the barrels, the bolts of cloth, there is another kind of inventory taken in quieter tones. A handful of women from a conquered village, held in a side building under guard, their names unrecorded, their fate undecided. The commander could release them. He could, in theory, send them home under escort. But the men would mutter, and muttering turns to doubt, and doubt is a dangerous thing in an army far from home. So instead, he stands before the gathered troops in the parade yard, his voice carrying over the clink of armor and the smell of horse sweat. "You have fought well," he says, "and for that, you will have your reward. At first, some expect coin. Others expect extra rations. But then the order is given, in the same measured tone that might announce the distribution of meat or ale, that each man will have his choice, from among the captives, for a night or for a week, depending on his rank. The cheer that goes up is not unanimous. A few glance at the ground. But most roar their approval, boots pounding the dirt, helmets raised in the air. For the women, there is no speech, no explanation. They are simply brought out into the yard, wrists bound, eyes darting from face to face. Some are defiant, standing straight. Others shrink inward, trying to make themselves small. The commander does not look at them as individuals. To him, they are a tool, a means to keep morale from cracking. This is not generosity. It is calculation. In the unspoken code of these campaigns, women taken in war can be currency. They cost the army nothing, yet buy days, even weeks, of obedience. No one will desert if he believes his turn is coming. No one will start a fight in camp when there is an easier outlet for his temper. Among the soldiers, the logic is just as cold. They know the commander could have given them coin, but coin can be lost in dice or stolen in the night. This, they think, is more personal, more immediate. The rough laughter begins before the first name is even called. And here is where the difference between this world and ours cuts deepest. In our time, an officer who tried such a thing would face a court-martial, disgrace, and prison. In theirs, it might be noted as shrewd leadership. In some accounts, even praised for keeping the men in line. The written records, when they exist at all, use language so dry it seems almost harmless. Rewards distributed, garrison appeased. For the women, the night is long. Some will be kept in the commander's own tent, parceled out to favored officers. Others are led away in twos and threes, disappearing behind the rows of canvas. There is no escape. The gates are guarded, the walls too high. Even if one could slip away, where would she go? Her village is burned. Her family may already be dead. When morning comes, the camp is quieter. The men are less sullen, less quick to snap at each other. The commander walks the yard with a satisfied air, as if he has solved the problem. The women are nowhere to be seen. Some are returned to the holding hut, some are kept by individuals, some simply vanish. The army moves on in a few days, leaving behind the same mix of ashes, broken doors, and unanswered questions. It is worth remembering that such practices were not confined to nameless mercenary bands. Chronicles from across medieval Europe, the Levant, and beyond mention similar gifts being made by nobles, knights, even kings to their followers. In some cultures, it was framed as hospitality, the host providing comfort to guests of high rank. In others, it was part of the formal spoils, divided like cattle or grain. And here lies the bitter truth: for the men, this was a perk of service. For the women, it was erasure, their identities stripped down to a single night's use. Once taken into the economy of war in this way, there was almost no path back to ordinary life. If they returned to their villages, they might be shunned as willingly defiled, even if every neighbor knew the truth. If they were carried along with the army, they became part of the moving camp, unpaid, uncounted, unremembered. From the ramparts, such scenes might look like celebration, a victorious army enjoying its spoils. From the ground, among the dust and the sweat and the sound of boots moving closer, it was something else entirely. A reminder that in war, the body could be currency, and once spent, there was no refund. But commanders were not the only ones who used such gifts to shape loyalty. Sometimes, the order came from even higher, from nobles who needed to keep dangerous allies close. And so, while this commander walks away with his men placated, somewhere else in another garrison, another leader prepares to bind loyalty in the same way. And in that other place, the transaction will be dressed in courtesy and smiles, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The camp looks different when the drums stop. In the day, it is all shouts, orders, and the iron clatter of armor being buckled. By night, the fire circles form, small islands of heat in a sea of shadow. The smoke smells of meat and sweat, the air thick with unwashed cloth and spilled ale. Somewhere, a lute is being plucked lazily, strings slightly out of tune. You're standing at the edge of one of those circles now, and the mood is heavier than the flames suggest. A few men hunch forward on low stools, their faces lit from below, shadows sharpening the jawlines, making the eyes look darker. They pass around a skin of wine and laugh in bursts, not the kind of laughter that comes from joy, but from nerves, from needing to fill silence with something. Then she is led in. Her wrists are tied in front, the rope cutting red into the skin. She stumbles once, and someone catches her by the elbow, not kindly but to keep her from falling. A murmur moves through the circle. No one cheers. This is not the noisy reward of the midday crowd, but the men make space for her all the same. Boots scrape against the packed dirt, widening the ring. They do not offer her a seat. She remains standing, the firelight reaching only halfway up her body, the rest swallowed by the night. Her hair is tangled, the hem of her dress stained with mud, and there is a single tear in the fabric across her hip, as though someone's hand had been there earlier. She looks at the ground, eyes fixed on a blackened knot of wood near the fire. A soldier tosses a bone into the flames, the crack startling in the quiet. Another man leans back, resting his weight on his palms, studying her the way one studies the weather, with a kind of resigned interest, knowing it will do what it will do. Someone mutters something about the commander's generosity, and a ripple of low voices follows. Not all camps are the same. In some, a woman like this would be brought forward loudly, the men calling for her like meat from the spit. Here, the silence makes it worse. Each man waits for another to start, but none rush. The wineskin makes another slow circle. The fire pops again. She shifts her weight from one foot to the other, but does not move back. The campfire's heat doesn't quite reach her, but the smell does, the fat dripping into the flames, the smoke crawling into her hair. Every breath she takes will carry it for days, even if she finds a river to wash in. She closes her eyes for a moment, as though steadying herself against a wave only she can feel. Far off, beyond the furthest circle of tents, a wolf howls. It is the kind of sound that should make men tighten their grip on weapons, but here, it only makes them stare into the fire more intently. There is nothing outside the camp that is more dangerous than what is inside. And so the night goes on, slow and without ceremony. The men drink, they watch, they wait. She waits too, but not for rescue. By morning, the fire will be nothing but ash and bent nails where the wood split. The men will leave in small groups to hunt, to guard, to march. She will remain in the memory of the camp for only as long as it takes for another to be brought in. And if you follow the faint trail of smoke rising from this circle into the dark, you will find another fire, another group of men, and another gift that arrived before dawn. That one, though, will not be welcomed with silence. If the campfire laughter of the night before had been for the soldiers alone, the morning belonged to the crowd. The same men who had jeered in the shadows now stood in daylight, boots planted in the churned mud of the market square, faces tilted toward the makeshift stage. This was not a market day for trade. No stalls were set with bread or cloth. The air was thick with the scent of old hay and horse sweat, and the only wares on offer were humiliation and spectacle. The woman was led in from the side, her hands bound before her with rough rope that had left her wrists red and swollen. She had been taken from a house just beyond the town wall, not burned, not broken, but emptied of everything that had once made it hers. She wore a thin chemise, its hem ripped and muddied, the neckline torn low enough that the cold made her shoulders shiver. The soldiers guiding her moved with practiced ease, as though they had done this many times before. A herald's voice rose above the murmuring crowd, reading out her offense, as if listing the price of fish. It was a short list. She had defied the garrison, spoken ill of the captain, and though it was said in a quieter tone, she had refused what was offered to her. Refusal, here, was not bravery. It was treason against the order that kept the soldiers fed and the markets safe from bandits. The people shifted uneasily. 2 men brought forward the punishment, a wooden pillory, worn smooth where heads and wrists had pressed countless times. But today, the punishment began before the pillory's lock was shut. The rope at her wrists was cut, only to be replaced by a grip on each arm as the soldiers pulled her chemise from her shoulders and down to her waist. The square did not gasp, they had seen worse. But there was a sharp stillness, a collective holding of breath, as if the moment between shame and jeer was sacred. The first shout came from a boy, no older than 12, his voice cracking as he called her a whore. Others followed, not everyone, but enough to keep the air heavy with noise. Some threw handfuls of dirt, 1 or 2 small stones, not meant to wound but to mark. Her head remained bowed, hair hanging forward like a veil that could not protect. You might think such a punishment would be short, a few minutes to make a point. But here, the point was the endurance. The soldiers took their time securing her in the pillory, adjusting it as though she were fine cargo that must be properly displayed. They let the jeering rise and fall, letting each wave of laughter or insult sink deep. And then came the part that everyone knew was next but no one said aloud. Once the market had taken its fill, she would not be freed. She would be led, still stripped, toward the barracks at the far end of the square. The path there was long enough for the crowd to follow, should they wish, and short enough for the soldiers to keep their pace unhurried. This was how the public and the private punishments intertwined, humiliation in the open, degradation behind closed doors. Some in the square turned away before she was unlocked from the pillory. Perhaps they had seen enough, or perhaps they simply did not want to be counted among the watchers when the soldiers took her away. But most stayed. There was no coin to be paid, no entry to buy, this was free, the cost only the weight of silence later. As the soldiers moved her toward the barracks, a few market-goers stepped aside quickly, as if afraid the touch of her arm might carry the same stain as her crime. Others leaned closer, their eyes hungry not for her but for the act of watching. The barracks doors swallowed her without ceremony. The market square's noise returned to the ordinary clatter of voices and hooves, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And yet, the memory of it clung. The same stage would be used for announcements, for lost and found, for weighing sacks of grain, but always with the echo of bare shoulders and lowered eyes. In another town, this might have been called justice. Here, it was simply part of the rhythm of power, the market in the morning, the barracks at night. And tomorrow, the square might hold someone else. But the soldiers, drunk on the ease of their authority, were not always given their way without question. In the next village over, the garrison was smaller, the captain less feared, and the people less willing to hand over their own. There, if a punishment was called for, it was done quickly, with fewer eyes to witness. Whether that was kinder or crueler, well, that depends on what comes after. And what came after, in that next place, was a different kind of gift to the soldiers, one arranged in the name of loyalty rather than law. If the market square's punishment had been public, with the crowd's eyes as sharp as any blade, what happened in the next village was quieter, and in some ways far more dangerous. Here, there was no pillory, no herald reading crimes aloud. Here, the exchange was done in the cool dimness of the captain's quarters, with the shutters half closed and the voices low enough to be mistaken for business. The road to this point had been short but steep. The family was poor enough that the annual tax, levied in coin or grain, could not be met. Their fields had yielded little that year, the drought burning the wheat before it was waist-high. The father had nothing left to sell but the tools he needed to plant again, and to sell them would mean surrendering next year's harvest before it began. The captain's clerk had already written their name in the ledger of debt, in the wrong column. It was the father's idea to go to the garrison. At least, that is what the neighbors would say later, some with pity, some with contempt. He carried no coin, no grain, not even the goat they had once thought of selling. He brought his daughter instead. She was 17, with her hair plaited simply down her back, wearing her best dress, though it was only a slightly cleaner shade of brown than the others she owned. She had not been told the true nature of the visit, or perhaps she had guessed and chosen silence over resistance. Silence was safer. The captain did not receive them at first. They spoke instead to the quartermaster, a man who had learned the value of making bargains the commander would approve. There was no formal negotiation. The terms were understood without being spoken. The tax would be considered paid, not erased, but postponed indefinitely, so long as the girl assisted the garrison when called upon. When the captain finally entered the room, he did not ask her name. He looked at her the way he might look at a new horse, weighing her height, her build, her quietness. Approval was a nod, nothing more. She was not led to a cell or paraded in the street. Instead, she was shown to a smaller room at the rear of the barracks, where she would stay for the night. For the family, the arrangement meant survival. They would keep their land another year. The younger children would eat. The roof would not be sold for timber. But the cost, though not recorded in any ledger, was written in the way the girl's mother would not meet her eyes when she returned home the next day. Unlike the public punishments, this transaction had no audience, no jeering crowd. But the village still knew. Such things are never truly hidden. The baker would glance away when she came for bread. The blacksmith's wife would press a coin into her palm and say nothing. Boys her age would smirk, or worse, look at her as if she had been marked. In a way, she had. For the garrison, she was part of a quiet reserve. Women from surrounding villages, owed, in the same way, called upon when the captain wanted to reward his men without opening the treasury. They were not prisoners, but neither were they free to refuse. The promise of protection from the garrison's own soldiers was as binding as any rope. And so the term, dowry in flesh, passed between lips and whispers, a phrase no one claimed to have coined but everyone understood. It was older than this village, older than this captain. It had happened in times of famine, of plague, of war. The coin of survival was sometimes a person, and those who paid with such coin rarely spoke of it again. The girl's father worked his fields the next day with a back that bent deeper than before, his hands blistered from the plow. He told himself he had saved his family, that he had done what was necessary. In the tavern, no one mentioned it to his face. But the silence in the room when he entered was a louder judgment than any shouted word. For the girl, life did not return to what it had been. She slept in her own bed, but the garrison could summon her at any time. A rider would appear at the edge of the field, or at the well, and she would follow without protest. The summons did not always come often, but the waiting was its own form of captivity. Sometimes she would pass the market square where, in other towns, women were stripped and mocked before being taken to the barracks. She wondered which was worse, the shame burned quickly in the open air, or the kind that seeped into a life quietly, leaving no moment of defiance to cling to. The captain, for his part, considered the arrangement efficient. It kept his men loyal without depleting stores. It kept the villages obedient without open violence. And it kept the coin flowing, not into the treasury, but into his own pockets, from farmers grateful to be left alone another season. But obedience born from such bargains was brittle. In one winter not far from now, when the garrison demanded more than a village could give, there would be resistance. And when soldiers came to take what was owed, they would find the doors barred, the fields empty, the people gone into the woods. What happened in that confrontation would be remembered for years, and it began with a bargain like this, spoken in a small room, between a desperate father and a man who saw people as payment. And just as this village's quiet surrender had been born from the shadow of the market square's public shame, so too would the next act grow from here, an act not of barter, but of exchange in the name of victory. Because in another corner of the war, a woman would find that being freed from one set of chains could mean being bound by another. From the quiet bargain in the captain's quarters, where a father paid his tax with the life of his daughter, we moved to a place where the word release meant something far more complicated than freedom. Here, the story begins at the edge of a battered fortress, its stone walls pocked with arrows, its gates chained shut from the inside. She had been a hostage for almost 2 years. Not a prisoner of war in the way men were, no iron collar, no chains on the ankles, but a living guarantee of her husband's loyalty. He was a minor noble, holding a sliver of land too close to enemy territory for comfort. When the enemy came, they demanded more than tribute, they demanded her. He gave her over himself, hoping the gesture would keep his family's lands intact. It did. For a while. Her captivity had been quiet, almost polite. The garrison she lived in fed her, clothed her, allowed her to walk the courtyard in the mornings. But always under watch. Every letter she wrote was read before being sealed. Every word she spoke to the other women in the fortress was weighed. She learned quickly that courtesy was just another kind of chain. When the fortress finally fell, it wasn't her husband who came for her. The victors, dressed in colors she had once called enemy, stormed through the gates, cutting down the guards who had kept her penned for so long. She thought, just for a moment, that freedom had arrived. That she would be returned to her family, her home, her name. But victory has its own rules. And one of them is simple: what belonged to the defeated now belongs to the victors. She was led out of the keep, not toward the road home, but toward the camp of the conquering army. The officer in charge told her, almost cheerfully, that she was no longer a hostage. Now she was a spoil, the same as the barrels of grain, the bolts of cloth, the silver candlesticks taken from the fortress chapel. The chains were gone from her days, but her nights would be another matter. The soldiers she passed looked at her differently than the ones who had kept her before. In the fortress, she had been guarded property, a hostage to be protected for political leverage. In the camp, she was reward currency, entertainment. The value had changed, and with it, her place in the world. That night, she was seated near the command fire. Not beside it, as a guest might be, but behind it, where the light showed her face but not her feet. Men came and went, some speaking to her as though they were already owed her company, others simply staring. She learned, in those hours, that freedom is a word that depends entirely on who holds the power to define it. The next morning, the captain of the victors summoned her. He offered no cruelty in his words, only a cold kind of finality. She would remain with the army as they moved on. If she behaved, she would be treated well. If she did not, there were always others who would take less convincing. She thought of her husband then, of the man who had given her away to buy peace. Would he even know where she was now? Would he care? And if he did, would he have the power to reclaim her? The answers to all three questions settled like stones in her stomach. Around the camp, other women moved with the same shadow in their eyes. Some had been taken from villages, some from caravans, some, like her, from the halls of defeated lords. They spoke little, perhaps because they knew their fates were too alike to need words. And yet, the life of a spoil was not always one of constant cruelty. There were moments of strange normalcy, fetching water, mending cloth, cooking meals. It was in these tasks that she felt the most danger, because they could almost trick her into believing she had a place here. But she didn't. Not really. She was still something that could be given away, traded, claimed. The irony was bitter. She had been a bargaining piece for two opposing sides, and in neither case had she been asked what she wanted. First, she was collateral, now, she was prize. Between the two, there was no victory, only a change in the flag above her head. By the time the army began to march again, she walked without resistance. The alternative was being dragged. And as the road wound toward the next city, she understood the unspoken truth. For women taken in war, the word release was simply a pause between captors. And just as she had been handed over from one set of soldiers to another, so too, in the next town, would another woman find herself, given, not because of politics or siege, but because of the mood of a commander looking to bind his men's loyalty in the cheapest way possible. The convent gates close behind her with a sound like a coffin lid, and for most, that would be the end of the story. But not here, not in a town where silence is weakness and rumor is a weapon sharper than steel. A woman can be locked away by the law, yes, but the law moves slowly, and anger does not. You can feel it in the streets before you see it. The quickened steps, the low muttering, the way faces turn in the same direction. The bell in the square is not ringing, but the crowd is already gathering. Someone claims she's back. Someone else swears she never left. What matters is not truth, but the scent of it. In medieval towns, justice was as much a performance as a principle, and the mob rarely waited for a stage. They drag her from the small rented room by the river, her hair unbound, her clothes half torn from the haste. The accusations spill out faster than hands can grab. She fed them, she slept with him, she took the enemy's coin. No one can agree on the crime, but all agree on the punishment. Hand her over to the soldiers stationed at the gate. It's quicker than a trial, and more satisfying than a fine. You can almost see the relief on the faces in the crowd. This way, no one has to decide her guilt. The soldiers will do it for them. There will be no formal sentence, no parchment to record her name. Only the press of bodies, the hiss of breath in her ear, the way the cobblestones scrape her knees as she stumbles forward. The captain at the gate does not ask questions. He does not need to. The men behind him already know what a gift like this means, a break from the monotony of watch duty, a chance to remind themselves what victory feels like in their hands. She looks past him, down the road that disappears into the fields, and for a moment it's as if she's thinking of running. But the crowd is still there, a living wall, and she is already halfway to the barracks. In the Middle Ages, a public handing over was more than just punishment for the accused, it was a warning to the rest. You could be next. Your daughter could be next. The law might sleep, but your neighbors never did. Even if you were innocent, innocence was fragile, easily cracked by a single whisper in the wrong ear. And once that whisper grew into a chant, the sound could not be stopped. By the time the barracks doors close, the square is nearly empty. People return to their stalls, their forges, their looms, carrying with them the satisfaction of a task completed. It will be a good story tonight, told over ale and bread, each telling sharpening the details. They will say they saw the fear in her eyes, or the defiance in her chin. They will argue over which soldier took her first. The truth will slip away like water from a broken bucket, but the moral will remain. The mob always wins. And if you think this was only the way of lawless villages, you'd be wrong. Even in the great cities, under the shadow of cathedrals and royal banners, the mob had its place. Judges could be bribed, guards could be ordered, but a crowd? A crowd could be summoned for free. Not far from here, in a different market square, another crowd gathers, but this time, the punishment will not be handed to soldiers quietly. No, here it will be dressed in ceremony, soaked in wine, and served with roasted meat. Here, the cruelty will be called celebration. The shouts in the market fade behind you, replaced by the deeper, steadier noise of a hall full of men who have already decided they've earned the night. The air is thick with smoke from the torches, the tang of spilled ale soaking into rushes underfoot. Long tables groan under trenchers of roasted meat, the fat dripping into the fire pit at the center. Someone strikes a drum in the corner, not for war now, but for rhythm, a beat to carry the evening forward. At the head of the table, the commander raises his cup. His speech is short. Victory doesn't need words when it already fills the room. Men bang fists against the wood, and the echoes ring like distant thunder. It would seem like any other feast, until the doors open. She enters between two soldiers, her wrists bound in ribbon, as if this were a wedding. The ribbon is red, too bright, too clean to be anything but mocking. Her hair has been combed, her torn dress pinned together in haste. This is not mercy, it is presentation. Dessert. Someone calls from the far end of the hall, and the laughter rolls like a wave. Cups are raised again, not to the king this time, but to the unspoken promise of the night. She is made to stand in the center, the heat from the fire at her back, the eyes of 50 men crawling over her. This is the part that the chroniclers never wrote down, the part that did not fit in the polished accounts of glory and conquest. But for the men in this room, it was as much a part of victory as the banners taken from the walls. The woman was not simply spoils, she was proof. Proof that the enemy was broken, that no law bound the conquerors now. A servant pours more wine. The meat is carved. The hall grows louder, the jokes more coarse, the boasts more extravagant. Somewhere, outside, the town is still smoldering, the smell of charred wood drifting in with the night air. But here, the only fire that matters is in the hearth, and in the eyes of the men watching her. They will eat until they can't sit upright, drink until their speech slurs, and then the second part of the feast will begin. By then, the laughter will be slower, the room warmer, the shadows deeper. Her ribbon will be untied, the mockery complete. And in the morning she will leave the hall not as a prisoner of war, but as a thing used and returned. Feasts like this were not recorded in the same ink as treaties or victories. They lived in memory, in rumor, in the quiet warnings passed from one generation to the next. And if you think the cruelty ended when the wine ran dry, you're mistaken. For some, the true punishment began the next day, when the hall was silent, and the eyes of the town followed every step. Not far away, on a muddy road lined with bare trees, another woman walks with her hands bound. She carries no platter, no ribbon, no torch to light her way, only the sword of her dead husband still strapped to her back, a relic the soldiers let her keep as a joke. By nightfall, she will be known not for the man she loved, but for the defeat he could not escape. You walk with the weight of steel across your shoulders, the leather strap cutting into your collarbone. The sword is longer than your arm, heavier than it should be, and colder than the air that seeps into your bones. They left it with you because they think it's funny, because it's a relic of a man who no longer draws breath, a trophy disguised as mercy. The road is narrow, churned into mud by the boots of the same soldiers who killed him. The trees lean over you, their bare branches like ribs in a carcass, closing you in. Every so often, a rider passes, never slowing, but always looking. You hear the creak of saddles, the jingle of bridles, and sometimes a chuckle. They know who you are. You were captured with his blood still warm on your hands, your skirts torn from the struggle. You didn't cry when they pulled you from the roadside ditch. You stared, daring them to see you as anything but his wife, his equal, the woman who had stood beside him when the gate fell. But that was before the march began, before the cold seeped in, before hunger hollowed you into something lighter than yourself. In the camp, you are not introduced by your name. You are the enemy's wife. The title itself stripping away any past you had. They keep you visible, not hidden in a tent, not locked away in a cart, but among them, a living reminder of their triumph. When they eat, you sit nearby. When they laugh, you are close enough to hear the words. It is not kindness, it is possession displayed. At night, the firelight turns their armor to gold, their shadows long and sharp. They pass you without touching for now, but the absence of hands does not mean safety. You are part of the victory feast stretched over days, a dish not yet served. And they want you to know it. One man, the one who struck your husband down, sometimes tosses you scraps of bread. Not to feed you, but to see whether you'll take them. He watches you eat the way a falcon watches a hare, not with hunger, but with ownership. The sword never leaves your back. You've stopped trying to understand why they let you keep it. Maybe it amuses them to see you burdened. Maybe they think it makes you easier to spot. Or maybe it is meant as a story, for them to tell later, when they boast about the day they took both the man and the woman, leaving her to walk with the weight of his death strapped to her spine. Days blur. Villages pass. You begin to measure time not in hours, but in meals you are not given, in stares you cannot escape. And when they finally reach their own town, you realize there will be no ransom, no trial, no exchange. You will not be returned in any way that resembles who you were. Because here, in the square, with the banners of their victory flapping above, they will present you to the same crowd that cheered your husband's death. Not as a prisoner of war. Not even as a widow. But as a symbol, proof that the enemy's bloodline, his pride, his bed, now belongs entirely to them. And if you think the law will save you, remember this: in some places, there is no law for women like you. In others, the law is silence. Which is where we go next. You might think there is a scroll somewhere, sealed with wax, that says what can and cannot be done to you. You might imagine a scribe leaning over a desk, scratching rules into parchment by candlelight. Rules that would shield you, if only someone would read them. But when you finally ask, you find there is nothing. No scroll. No ink. No mercy written in the hand of the law. In this town, in this year, a woman taken in war is not property, and she is not free. She exists in the space between, where nothing is defined except by the men who hold her. Some call her a spoil, some call her a servant, some call her nothing at all. The names change with the speaker, but the meaning stays the same. She belongs to whoever has the power to keep her. In the market square, you hear two men arguing over a sheep. The animal has more rights than you. Its ownership is documented, its worth debated, its theft punishable. If a man takes you, there will be no fine, no summons, no magistrate to decide. The silence is the verdict. In other towns there are laws, but they are worse than the silence. In one city to the east, a decree says that any unmarried woman captured in war may be given in service to soldiers for a term decided by the commander. No limit. No oversight. In another, it is not even dressed in official language. The garrison commander simply announces the spoils, and no one objects. You think of the places you've heard about in whispered stories, where even a noblewoman can be handed over if her husband is on the wrong side of a war. Titles don't matter when the victor holds the pen, and chooses not to write your name at all. Some people will tell you that customs are stronger than laws, and here, the custom is obedience. The elders will nod and say this is how it has always been. The priests will shrug, claiming that the scriptures speak of wives obeying husbands, not conquerors, but they will not challenge the swords that hang at the soldiers' belts. And so your fate is not decided in a court, but in a camp, in a barracks, in the shadowed corner of a tavern where the next gift is discussed. Your worth is measured in how much loyalty you can buy from a hungry garrison, how many days of service your presence will secure. But every custom, every silence has its price. And sometimes, that price is set in the dark, at the end of a corridor, in the bargain no one dares to record. Which brings us to the guard at the prison gate, and the kind of deal that will never make it into any book of law. You've been here for 3 nights, locked in the narrow stone cell that smells of mildew and unwashed hands. The air is cold enough to bite, the straw thin enough to feel every ridge of the floor beneath you. Your crime, they said, was theft, a loaf of bread from the market stall, 2 onions from a cart left unattended. The baker swore in front of the magistrate that you smiled when you took them. He made it sound worse than murder. In another town, the sentence might be a whipping in the square, or a fine your family could never pay. Here, the fine is paid differently. Here, the guard leans in at night, his keys jingling, and says there is a way to make this go away. His tone is not cruel, but it is not kind. It is the voice of someone who has said these words before many times. You know what he means. Everyone in the women's cells knows. It is not written on the docket, not carved into the wooden boards that pass for a record of justice. It is said in whispers between the bars, when the rest of the guards have gone to drink. A night's service, and by morning your crime disappears. The ledger will say you were released for lack of evidence. He gives you until the next change of watch to decide. As if it's a choice. You think of the other woman who left the cell 2 weeks ago with the same offer. She walked out in the morning, her hair tangled, her dress torn. The guard patted her on the shoulder, like they were old friends. She did not come back to the market after that. If you refuse, you will stay here until the magistrate decides your case. That could be days, could be months. And the longer you stay, the worse it will be when they finally send you out, with no home, no work, and the mark of a thief burned into the gossip of the town. If you accept, you walk out tomorrow. The guard will nod to his captain, and your name will be scratched off the list. No one will speak of it openly, but everyone will know. It will hang on you like the smell of the cell, following you into every doorway. The night passes slowly. You hear the footsteps of the watch above you, the shifting of the rats in the corners, the slow drip of water from the ceiling. By the time he comes back, keys in hand, you have made your choice, or the choice has made itself. The bargain is struck without a word, and when the sun comes up, you are free. But as you step out past the prison gate, you see a line of soldiers waiting. Not to arrest, not to punish, but to collect the next release. And the woman at the front of that line is looking at you the way you looked at the last one. And if you follow that line past the gates, past the chatter of the market, you'll see how this bargain is not just for thieves, but for anyone the soldiers decide to make an example of. That's where we go next. They make sure the road is busy that morning. It is not enough for the punishment to happen, it must be seen. The sun is still low, the mist not yet burned off the grass along the ditch, when you hear the shuffle of boots and the uneven rhythm of a rope pulling against wrists. A woman walks between two soldiers, her head bare, her dress streaked with the dirt of the holding cell. She is not dragged, not yet, but every step is heavy, as if she knows that slowing down will not save her. Her crime, they say, was helping deserters. In a war where men disappear overnight, and armies bleed soldiers faster than they bleed enemies, that is treachery. No one speaks of why she did it, whether it was love, pity, or a debt owed. The details don't matter. The message matters. And the message will be delivered at the town gate, where every traveler passes. The gate itself is tall, a relic of older wars, its wooden beams darkened with years of smoke and weather. Beneath it, a line of soldiers waits. They stand in partial armor, enough to make them look official but not enough to slow them down when the moment comes. Each man holds his place the way farmers hold scythes before a harvest, tools ready, work inevitable. You watch from the market edge, pretending to adjust the onions in your basket. Others do the same. The baker leans against his doorframe. A boy climbs onto a barrel for a better view. No one says the words, but everyone feels them. She will not come back the same. At the edge of the square, the soldiers stop her. One reads the accusation aloud, not for her, but for you. For all of you. The voice is flat, carrying over the morning bustle like a church bell no one wants to hear. He ends with the same phrase they always use. May this be a warning to others. It has the cadence of a prayer, though no saint would claim it. She does not look at the crowd. Her gaze is fixed on the ground just past the gate, where the packed earth turns to road. Perhaps she is imagining walking it as a free woman. Perhaps she is counting the steps to where the soldiers will take her. When the reading is done, one of them gestures, and she is moved forward, slowly, deliberately, to the waiting line. The first soldier steps out. He says nothing, just takes the rope from the escort and leads her away from the gate. The rest follow, not in a rush, but with the quiet certainty of men who know they will not be interrupted. The crowd shifts. Some look away. Some watch too closely. A mother pulls her son back by the collar when he tries to follow. There is no law written in the town's ledgers for this. No official record that says a woman who helps deserters must be given to the garrison. But the soldiers do not need the law. They have the gate, the uniforms, and the silence of those who watch. That is enough. When the line disappears down the side street toward the barracks, the market noise returns, slower, muted, like a song played underwater. A man at the well spits into the dust. The baker goes back inside. The boy climbs down from the barrel. By noon, someone will be telling the story to a traveler, lowering their voice at the worst parts. And by evening, there will be another knock at another door, another woman led through the gate. Not for the same crime, but for the same purpose. If you follow the road they take, past the barracks, past the open field where soldiers train, you will see where such warnings end, in the morning after, when the soldiers are gone but the woman remains. That is where we go next. The barracks are empty when she wakes. No voices, no boots on the floorboards, no sound but the faint rustle of the wind through the open shutters. The air smells of last night's fire, and of sweat, and of the ale spilled on the long table in the common room. She lies on the hard bench a moment longer, her wrist stiff from the rope burns, her head heavy from the hours before. When she sits up, the first thing she notices is the quiet. It is not the peace of safety, but the kind that comes after a storm, when the damage is done and the world pauses to see what is left standing. Her dress is torn along the hem. Someone's belt lies coiled on the floor beside her. She does not touch it. The door is open. No one stands guard. Outside, the yard is scattered with signs of departure. Wheel ruts carved deep into the dirt, a half-broken spear propped against the wall, a cooking pot overturned and abandoned. The soldiers have moved on. To another town, another war, another gate. She steps out barefoot, the ground cold under her feet. The ashes of last night's fire are still warm in the center, ringed with empty tankards and the bones of a feast she never saw. A crust of bread sits in the dust near the fire pit. She picks it up, brushes it clean, and eats it without thinking. Hunger makes its own rules. There is no one to tell her where to go. No escort, no crowd, no magistrate to sign her away again. The road lies open in both directions. Behind her, the barracks slump like a carcass picked clean. Ahead, the track winds toward the horizon, past hedges grown wild and ditches deep enough to hide in. She starts walking toward what she thinks might still be home. Each step sends a small stab of pain through her soles, but she does not slow. The village is half a day away, if it is still standing. She tries not to think of who will be waiting, or what they will say. In her mind, she hears the voices from yesterday, the soldier reading her crime, the mutter of the market crowd, the shuffling feet of the line behind her. She wonders if they will remember her face, or just the way she walked through the gate. More likely, they will tell the story without her name, the way such stories are always told. The sky is pale with the first weak sun of spring. Somewhere behind her, in the shadow of the barracks, a dog begins to bark, sharp, frantic, as if chasing the memory of the men who left. She does not look back. Hours later, when the road dips toward the familiar fields, she sees smoke rising. Not the thin, blue thread of a hearth fire, but the thick, gray coil of something larger. The closer she gets, the more certain she becomes. The soldiers did not leave her village untouched. She stops at the edge of the last hill, looking down at what was once home. Some roofs are caved in, the church door hangs open, and the well in the square is ringed with muddy footprints too large to be children's. There are people moving in the streets, but she cannot tell if they are neighbors or strangers picking over what is left. Her first thought is to turn away, to vanish into the hedgerows and keep walking until the road runs out. But her feet take her forward past the charred fence, past the house where she grew up, past faces that glance at her and quickly turn aside. No one asks where she has been. No one has to. They know. And somewhere in the silence that follows her, a whisper begins, a warning passed from mouth to mouth, daughter to daughter, wife to wife. It will outlast the smoke and the soldiers, traveling faster than either. It says, when the soldiers come, there are many ways to lose your freedom. And if you listen closely, you'll hear how that whisper turns into a story, one told in the same low voices for years to come. That's where we go next. It does not live in books. It does not need ink, or parchment, or a priest's blessing to survive. It lives in kitchens, in the pauses between stirring the pot and setting the bread to rise. It hides in the corners of the tavern, in the murmurs exchanged when the fiddler plays too loudly for the words to carry far. It begins the same way each time. Do you remember when the soldiers came? No names. No dates. Just that, the moment the world narrowed to boots on the road and the sound of iron against wood. The older women speak first. Their voices are low, their eyes fixed on the table or the fire, not on the faces of the girls listening. They talk of nights when the air smelled of smoke and fear, when the law stopped at the edge of the village, and the rest was decided by the strongest hands. They say some were taken as punishment, some as payment, and some simply because they were there. The younger women nod, even if they were not born yet. They have heard it before. They know how the story goes, though they never interrupt. It is not a tale to be questioned. There are always details that shift, depending on who tells it. In one version, the girl was the miller's daughter, her hair like the wheat in summer. In another, she was a widow, already marked by grief, who did not fight when they bound her wrists. In some tellings, she came back, head high, dress torn but her voice steady. In others, she never returned at all. The men do not tell this story. If they mention it, it is with a shrug, or a muttered, "That was war." To them, it is an old shadow, nothing more. But among the women, it is a warning wrapped in memory. The girls listening do not hear only what happened, they hear what might happen again. They learn to watch the road from the first hill, to count the days since the last patrol, to notice when the men in the tavern drink too quickly and laugh too loud. They learn that safety is a fragile thing, and that sometimes, survival means disappearing before anyone can call your name. By the time the story ends, the pot on the fire is boiling, and the bread is ready for the oven. Life goes on, as it always does. The door opens, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of hooves in the street. Heads turn toward the window without thinking. The girl nearest the hearth asks, "Is it true?" The oldest woman in the room, the one with the quiet eyes and the scar that disappears into her hairline, does not answer. She just presses the loaf into the girl's hands and says, "Remember it." And so the story travels, crossing years and borders, never needing a name or a face to give it weight. It waits, like a shadow at the edge of the firelight, ready to step forward when the sound of boots returns. Because in every place the soldiers have marched, there is someone who can tell it. And in every place they have yet to march, there is someone ready to listen.